With the watch market doing its best impression of Hugh Edwards' career, there are increasingly more incredible opportunities to snag an amazing watch at a bargain price, but it can be challenging to find them. So let me spare you the effort, because I've been scouring the latest arrivals of our good friends at Subdial to bring you a selection of great watches as hot as a McDonald's apple pie, for a lot less than you might think. Who are Subdial? They're a pre-owned retailer that specializes in collector-focused watches, from stuff like affordable vintage Grand Seiko all the way up to whatever your little heart can possibly desire. What's really good though is the unexpected gems that give you so much more for so much less than you'd expect, and today I've got a whole bunch of them. Stay to the end if you want to risk your wallet. I know I did. Okay, so I'm going to have to show my ignorance here because I'm probably the only person in the world that didn't know where the Rolex GMT-Master got its famous Pepsi colour scheme from. I guess I just assumed Rolex, being Swiss, was bipartisan. Actually, it turns out that Pan Am, with which the original GMT-Master was a kind of collab before collabs were cool, used to have a red and blue ring around its logo, just like the GMT-Master bezel. Well, Rolex flipped it around so nighttime was dark blue and not red, so it made a bit more sense, at least up until the Rapture. There have been many other bezel colorations since, but the Pepsi pairing is simply iconic, which is why the latest and greatest ceramic versions hit peak prices of £24,000, well over double the RRP. But it's not quite so far ahead anymore, having dropped 10k in the new year, edging closer to its now increased RRP of £9,450. But I think we can do better. The GMT Master's fame really hit its stride when aeronautical nutcase Chuck Yeager started wearing one. If you don't know who he is, he's the dude who found out what happens when you go faster than the speed of sound by, well, going faster than the speed of sound. It was the test pilot equivalent of seeing if something is hot by touching it. As a result, every test pilot, aviator, soldier, and of course astronaut wanted one too. There were waitlists for them even back in the 60s and 70s, with dealers discounting Daytonas to try and assuage irritable customers. And you can get a GMT Master much closer not just to Jaeger's, but the current RRP too, by picking up a 16750 instead. It's got the original aluminium bezel, the off-white printed lume, and of course those famous Pan Am colours. There are few brands out there as underappreciated as Glashütte Original, a watchmaker more slept on than a Central Park bench. Chances are its origins, and perhaps even its existence, are a bit of a mystery to you, so here's the recap. Germany, along with France and England, was one of the primo places to make a wristwatch, with the many brands emerging from the German forests, hallmarking their watches with the term Glashütte Original, as a badge of their national pride. Which is a nice, healthy level of national pride to have, and probably shouldn't be taken any further. Well, it was for national pride and also to stop the pesky Swiss from faking their watches, although the Swiss then just faked the term Glashütte Original as well on their fake German watches and made the Germans mad, and eventually after a bit of a kerfuffle Germany was split in two and the East German watch brands were amalgamated by the state until the Berlin Wall fell and that conglomerate of watch brands was finally privatized again. When that finally happened, a Langenzone was out of there like a slicked up whippet, leaving the remaining brands to contemplate what to do next. In the end, they decided they liked each other's company too much to split up and stayed put as one, rebranding it in honour of that original term, Glashütte Original. Unless you think Glashütte Original is nothing more than a Langenzone's sloppy seconds, it is a legitimate producer of high quality wristwatches in the German style, which is to say stern and slightly intimidating. This gold Senator Panorama date Moonphase, for example, has an RRP of over £20,000, and that's serious money. Although a pre-owned purchase can land you this Germanic grail for a little under £9,000. Us frogs have been hot panning it on RRPs for a while now, and although we're all acutely aware of the increasing prices being stacked up on top of us like some kind of gold-plated game of Buckaroo, I don't think we really fully appreciate how much things have moved on. and that presents a golden opportunity for some wristwatch life hacks. A whole decade ago, before people knew what a COVID was, Jaeger-LeCoultre released a watch that laid out a few jaws along the floor, the Geophysic. Seemingly subtle in its presentation, it was in fact a very clever true beat seconds watch with a remontoire mechanism and concept Gyrolab split balance arrangement from the very high-tech and very expensive Extreme Lab. It's like a Langenzone meets De Bethune, all inside the shell of a Seiko. Jokes, it's styled to honour the original 1958 Geophysic, an anti-magnetic explorer's watch built to celebrate a year-long science project called the International Geophysical Year. At the time, the RRP was around £7,500, which, to put that into perspective, won't even buy you a men's quartz reverso anymore. Give it another few years and it won't even buy you a tube of Soylent Green. In fact, if you want anything anywhere near approaching this level of high horology complexity, you're going to be spending around twice that with Jaeger-LeCoultre, or more realistically, with someone else entirely. As it happens though, despite being an absolute barnstormer at launch and commanding some strong above RRP residuals, today the Geophysic True Second is stuck in a pricing time warp at a little under £6,000. Since you're here already, may as well hit the subscribe button if you haven't before. Every time you do, it sends a little electric pulse to my brain that stops me from keeling over, so thank you. The pages of history are filled to bursting with legendary watches, and I'm not just referring to my browser. Architect of many of those historical moments is the International Watch Company, a business that epitomizes the task failed successfully. Embracing the American industrialization of watchmaking, founder F.A. Jones opened up a factory in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, for tax reasons in case you were wondering, and was so capable of producing high-quality watches at volume that he promptly made too many and went bankrupt. Thankfully, his replacements were a little more business savvy and exercised a solid balance of supply and demand that got IWC back on its feet again. That quality and precision established by Jones from the outset is what allowed the Portuguese to come into being, later to be renamed Portugieser after some brand consultation with Phil Mitchell. It was the 1930s, a tumultuous time for the economy and for pocket watches, which had both turned to shit. People had no money, except the people who did, and they didn't want to be spotted ambling down the street swinging a gold pocket watch by its chain. Many watchmakers went and almost went bust, including Patek Philippe, whose new owners found salvation in a fresh form of watchwear, the wristlet. Already popular with women, the wristlet's conservative appearance and understated presence made it the perfect step change for the industry, although it needed to be given a more masculine rebrand. Wristicle was considered but ultimately abandoned. It would be the wristwatch. And IWC's first wristwatch, the Portuguese, was delivered to a customer from the faraway land of, that's right, Ukraine. They were going to send some to the Portuguese wholesaler who'd requested them in the first place, but by that point there was a war on, don't you know. The Portuguese, the watch, I mean, being that it inherited a chronometer-grade pocket watch movement, has always been distinguished by its big dial and small second layout, and that's one you can still buy new today for a not completely unreasonable £6,200. Or alternatively, you can save yourself a nice holiday away and pick one up pre-owned for £4,900 instead. Who would have ever thought that Bulgari would not only end up making watches of Gerald Genta lineage, but would make watches of Gerald Genta lineage and actually be respected for it? The Octo collection, which given Gerald Genta's other 8-sided designs is based on the highest number he could count to, was one that superseded the man himself, as the Genta brand was absorbed into Bulgari in the year 2000. Far be it from a corporate cash grab from a gigantic conglomerate, or rather as well as, Bulgari's purchase of Gerald Genta actually has, like that time I tripped over the collected works of William Butler Yeats, a bit of a poetic twist. The Bulgari watch, which you'll know if you see because the branding looks like it was done by Jack Torrance, was a watch designed for Bulgari by none other than Mr. Gerald Genta. I know, right? It's round and everything. So you'd imagine that Bulgari's purchase of Gerald Genta and LVMH's subsequent purchase of Bulgari would lead to some pretty low-effort attempts to milk every last lick of lactose from that timepiece teat. But actually, Bulgari swung it completely the other way, kickstarting a record-breaking streak of mechanical complication that was, quite frankly, astonishing. Here's where it gets interesting. The entry to the Octo line, the Finissimo, is a watch that manages to combine a skinny 6.3mm thickness with 100 meters of water resistance. But it comes at a cost, £12,900. That being as high as a Khruangbin crowd at Coachella, Bulgari added a more affordable watch in underneath it, the circa £7,000 Solotempo. From the front, it looked basically identical, but it was a little thicker at about a centimetre. I suppose it kind of undermined the more expensive Finissimo, and so Bulgari switched out the Solotempo for the visibly different Octo Roma. Still a really nice watch, but not quite a full Octo, what with it being round. But the Solotempos made by Bulgari didn't just disappear, and that means for just £3,250, that's Black Bay money, you can add one to your collection. There are two certainties in life: death and the depreciation of Grand Seiko. In 2022, Grand Seiko announced to the world its 1,862nd new watch that year, the memorably titled SBGW291, doing everything it possibly could to deter anyone from actually buying it. I can only think that it's some kind of rite of passage, an honour system that weeds out all but the true believers and pure of heart willing to find hope in an otherwise lost cause. And those who did were fairly rewarded with a beautiful mid-size watch that closely resembles Grand Seiko's 44GS original. Set with sparkling markers and a hand-wound 9S64 caliber, the SBGW291 is all watches to all people, except maybe the dyslexic. And if you disagree and think it's not a watch for you, then I say fair enough. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and I hope you enjoy your SpaghettiOs. Costing £4,850 new, it seems the random number generator Grand Seiko uses to decide its pricing fell in favour of the customer this time. Although that doesn't mean we can't do better, with a lightly used example from, let me check, about 5 minutes ago. Yes, they say a car loses a whole bunch of value as soon as you drive it off the lot. In the case of the SBGW291, which is possible to pick up for less than £3,000, you might perhaps be wondering if it came with a few magic beans as well. Spandau Ballet rival Wormwood Wiggles' hit song Silver summarises exactly how I feel about Tudor's Black Bay 58 in the colourless precious metal. Silver! Second comes right after the winner. Not only are there no words that rhyme with silver, no one really cares about it either, much to the disappointment of Wormwood Wiggle. Side note, go take a look at the meaning of Spandau Ballet. It's unexpected. What was also unexpected was Tudor's enthusiasm for a precious metal Black Bay, typically an affordable piece made entirely unattainable by anyone without a head injury, thanks to its uncompromising price. Given that a solid gold Tudor is basically a bridesmaid wearing white and grabbing the groom's crotch at the altar on the bride's big day, it made more sense for silver to be the precious metal of choice. Except, of all the bridesmaids, silver is the one that spends all day saying how lucky the bride is and how they themselves will never find anyone, which is because, as everyone's already told them, their standards are way too high. 6 feet tall, 6-figure salary and 6-pack abs. They're punching for a £4,000 plus asking price, but by the time uncle's got his shirt off and auntie's crying in the corner, they're happy to take £2,800. If you think all that is an absolute load of nonsense, wait until you hear what I've got to say over on Patreon. Join me there for exclusive videos and group chit-chat with all these lovely people, where we wrestle with the big debates in the watchmaking scene. Links in the description. Thank you. There's a common sense in watch collecting today that Rolex's prices have jumped the shark, the sea, and pretty much all the land masses as well, although I'm a firm believer that's only from the perspective of a certain type of buyer. If you're looking to slip a shiny new Blue Dial Skydweller into your collection, then sure. But if you're willing to take a walk on the mild side, then boy have I got an understated option for you. Check this out. Forget Rolex for a moment, because if you slide down a level from the Crown's Edge Sheeran to its Rupert Grint equivalent Tudor, you can save yourself a few £1,000s over the entry-level Oyster Perpetual and go for the £3,500 Black Bay 36 instead. And it's a great watch. Carries all the visual identity of the Oyster Perpetual, plus all the things that make the Oyster Perpetual what it is as well, such as Oyster and Perpetual. but it's the Oyster and Perpetual we have at home. It's the Tudor Constant Clam. But come on, what you really wanted was the original, and I'm here to tell you can have your shellfish and eat it too by buying a Rolex for £1,000 less than the Tudor. No joke. It's the Oyster Precision in 34mm, and it'll ask of you no more than £2,500. Where our adventure really starts to take a turn for the unbelievable is when I tell you it's possible to get a Big 3 precious metal chronograph that isn't the size of a tardigrade's Tadger for well under the price of a brand new Submariner. I know it sounds like I've spent too much time in an over-chlorinated swimming pool, but I promise you I am not a castle shy of a chess match. This is completely legit. The chronograph complication in a Big 3 watch is something of an unusual beast because for the longest time it suffered at the hands of horological procrastination. It's a tough one to make, you see, and so they had others do it for them. And in the case of the Vacheron Constantin reference 47001 here, it was a duet between Jaeger-LeCoultre and module maker Dubois de Praz, filling in behind the scenes, whilst Vacheron Constantin lip-synced. That gives you a 12-9-6 subdial arrangement, less popular than the 9-6-3 arrangement, which itself is less popular than the twin subdial 9-3 arrangement. So in this configuration it's basically the Beverly Hills Cop 3 of chronograph layouts. But Beverly Hills Cop 3 is still well worth watching. It's no third Ghostbusters. Given the neo-vintage scene is right on our doorstep, I genuinely can't think of a better example of a watch that gives you more for less. You can pay more for a better configuration, a case bigger than 38mm, a clear case back and a manually wound movement, but you will pay a lot more. For less than £9,000, this is as good as value for money gets. If, however, you wear your trousers at the waist or lower, and the old man vibe of the previous Vacheron just isn't doing it for you, then let's switch out one for another, but this time something a bit more aligned with the kids. We're catching the tail end of integrated mania, and the first to fall is the Overseas, which is actually a bit unfair when you dig deeper. Back in the 70s, Genta made a very famous AP watch. It was a bigger game changer than playing Oxyphene Butazone in Scrabble, and naturally others copied. Patek followed a few years after, and we're led to believe that Vacheron, ever the sullen one and never on trend, waited until last. But not before asking Patek, if AP jumped off a cliff, would you do it too? But that's not quite true. Perhaps in a case of malicious compliance, Vacheron overreacted to the Royal Oak, producing multiple different types of integrated watch to see what would stick. First, and before the 222, it was the Royal, clearly named to be misleadingly similar to the Royal Oak, which came out before the Patek Nautilus and looked surprisingly similar, if a little more rectangular. It was even mimicked by Audemars Piguet a few years on with the rectangular 6005, both of which were inspired of course by Thierry Stern's original masterpiece, the Cubitus. The 222 followed Vacheron's Royal, and then the 333 of the 1980s, and then the Phidias of the early 90s, and then the Overseas a few years further on, all of which pipped Patek's awkward Aquanaut. So yeah, Vacheron wasn't just throwing shit at the wall to see what stuck, it was experimenting with defecate from different species as well, but nevertheless, Patek Philippe's easy breezy success seems, by comparison, a little unfair. And Vacheron just can't catch a break, because while Steel Nautili and Aquanaut enjoy sky-high prices, the Overseas is dropping faster than a Sufjan Stevens record. The most least popular, that is to say the cheapest of the current crop of Overseas, is the Silver Dial, and it's available for a third off retail. If there's one thing Jaeger-LeCoultre is great at, it's making things thin. Perhaps if it wasn't into watchmaking, it would have been a Peloton trainer. But on this current timeline, it's the creator of the thinnest, smallest and most impressive movements in the world. Some of its best records have been beaten in recent years, but nevertheless it's still incredibly relevant, not least of all because the latest entrants into the record books are not only borderline unusable, they cost as much as the cleaning bill after an Elton John party. The thinnest watch in the world, the Bulgari Octo Finissimo Ultra Kosk, measures in at 1.7mm thanks to some watchmaking hacks to spread things around a little bit, the horological equivalent of trying to get the bits and bobs drawer in the kitchen shut. Make the movement in the traditional way and you can comfortably get it down to 1.85mm, and that's what's available in this Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin. It's all down to the hand-wound caliber 849, which when pushed to its limits can be squeezed into a watch just 3.6mm thick. Here it's a little over 6mm total, but when you get that in your hand and on your wrist, still feels thinner than a slice of value ham. And given that this is a once record-breaking movement, it would be believable to think that it came with a record-breaking price. But no, it's sitting comfortably alongside the Tudor Black Bay at around £3,850. There are few chronographs better known than Omega's Speedmaster. Rolex's Daytona, so I've heard, also gets more than its fair share of attention. Completing that trifecta is the Zenith Chronomaster, better known by the name of its original caliber, the El Primero. Far be it from being a South American dictator, the El Primero is a flash-frozen moment of a future that could have been, and then kind of was again anyway. The El Primero was, really, the most streamlined, efficient, technically impressive horseshoe ever released the day before Carl Benz started up his engine. The automatic chronograph was the pinnacle of the most troublesome movement in watchmaking and marked a peak in the golden years of the industry. Only for someone to discover all that effort was worth nothing because a little bit of crystal could do the job a lot better. That timing, although it resulted in the complete and utter shutdown of Zenith, actually turned out to be quite fortuitous, because after a long hibernation, when mechanical watches emerged blinking into the spring of their renaissance, it was the best, most recent and most readily available option for an automatic chronograph. The caliber 11, released alongside the El Primero, was 7.7mm, too thick. The Valjoux 7750 of the mid-1970s was as thick as the instruction manual for a nuclear submarine at 7.9mm. That left the El Primero a petite little thing at 6.5mm, making it the perfect choice to keep the 1988 Daytona revival no more than 12mm above the wrist. It's never been as popular in its own skin, the El Primero, and an RRP at present of almost £9,000 isn't helping. But for fans of the plucky survivor, or chronograph completionists, it's a must-have in the collection. Thankfully then, a pre-owned price comes in under the RRP of a Moonwatch at £5,900. As if to demonstrate just how far your watch budget can go when you take the road less travelled, this is the Parmigiani Tonda 1950, a watch that in every way rivals a Patek Philippe Calatrava, but without the unspeakable suffering of your bank account. Whether grated on pasta or packing the caliber PF701, Parmigiani is basically the perfect watch enthusiast watch, because it invites lengthy and uninterrupted explanations about things most people really don't care about. Here's one. You might be thinking the platinum micro-rotated movement looks an awful lot like the caliber 96 found in the LUC Shopards, and that's because it's designed by the same bloke, Michel Parmigiani. Not to say he's a one-trick pony, although hand-finished micro-rotor calibers of exceptional quality and beauty is a pretty neat trick. I can only do that one thing where it looks like your thumbs come off. And if you thought the Chopard LUC was already off the beaten path, then Parmigiani is one of those cliffside passes where they bang some nails and a bit of rope into the side and you have to hang on for dear life. The advantage of that is the opportunity to own an incredible movement in a beautiful watch for the price of a Datejust. Oh, but wait, there's more, because if after all that still nothing's doing it for you and what you really want is a Big 3 vintage watch for the price of that international barometric measure of watch cost, the Tudor Black Bay, then get out. I'm not a wizard. Or maybe I am, because check out this Vacheron Constantin in steel from 1955 for £3,950. This may well be one of the cheapest ways to feel old money rich, short of blasting peasants with an over-under. Just look at that slender 35mm case, those teardrop lugs barely hanging on like the guttering of its owner's crumbling estate, that dial faded to a deep cream after decades of summering in Tuscany. It's good, and to be honest, it's too good for the likes of me. It wouldn't be such a case of mutton dressed as lamb, more like the help having cream and tea in the orangery. I've changed my mind actually. It's not a cheap watch after all. Well, the watch may be a lot less than I'd expected, but it comes with the mandatory purchase of an E-type Jag, a closet full of barber, and a little bit of inbreeding, and that's not a price I'm willing to pay. We finish where we started by wrapping on one of Rolex's most popular watches, now returning to values that seem more in keeping with reality. At one point it would have been cheaper to drive a Volvo estate into the sea than it would to wear a Submariner. But these days, with the market making its moves, perhaps we'd have to downgrade that example to a Nissan Micra. Peak Submariner, for me, is right about the time they switched to ceramic, or rather, just a little bit before. The Arts and Crafts bracelet had been replaced with something a bit beefier, the caliber was robust and reliable, and it still retained the look and feel we'd enjoyed since its launch in the 1950s. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the latest and greatest, and objectively they are better. Only this for me captures the feeling of underwater exploration without having to get my feet wet. If this is cosplaying Jacques Cousteau, the ceramic subs are more like bankers at Goldman Sachs. It also helps that this classic Submariner is actually cheaper than the current RRP of the modern dateless equivalent by some £650. And better yet, it's starting to mingle with Seamasters too. In fact, it's actually cheaper than the Bond 60th anniversary, with the irony being that Bond wore a Submariner first, and Rolex don't even mention it. See, that's classy. Needy Omega, take note. Well, a big thank you goes to Subdial for supporting this video. I'd be incredibly grateful if you clicked on the link to their website in the description below and had a look at what they've got to offer. Maybe pass your credit card to someone you trust before you do that. And why not set me a challenge to find a particular type of watch for a specific multiplier of black bays? Post your suggestions down in the comments below. And remember, bargain watches are just like low-fat chocolate. Just because they're less doesn't mean you should have more. Or does it? See you next time.